listeners to Unstoppable Tracy and James Rehob with the Today Show and Unstoppable You. So excited that you're part of this live stream, live on Facebook, and in the future you'll also see it on YouTube and on the Disability Channel on Roku, and so broadcasting everywhere. But we are excited to be live streaming with all of you fabulous souls. It is with great pleasure that I welcome James Rehob, who is counsel with the Ministry of Attorney General's office, and he has an energy focus, and that's why I brought him on, because he and I have an energy together. Welcome, James.
Thank you so much, Tracy. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to your listeners to having me on. I'm excited to be here today and talk about accessibility and raise awareness and sensitivity about accessibility issues. So that's great, Tracy.
We are so glad to have you. You and I were together last week on an educational workshop.
That's right. Yeah, we had two excellent sessions together. The first day one was with Lauren McDonald, who's our storied litigator in front of the Human Rights Commission with 30 years of experience. And then we had on day two, the Lady Gaga of disability, Miss Unstoppable Tracy. And I got to tell you, the effervescence and the energy that you bring to these awareness sessions and training sessions is just unparalleled.
James, you were so thoughtful, but you were mind-blowing as well. You were talking about unconscious biases, and you shared a lot of personal stories.
Yeah, that's right. There's a fair bit, I'm at the age now where I can look back on my career and my life and really sort of ponder about how far we've come in some ways. And we really have. I mean, the AODA itself is an incredibly robust statute with wonderful, very, very detailed and rich standards under the AODA that have moved Ontario forward significantly. That's for sure. It's a wonderful statute. And before it, the groundbreaking Ontario with Disabilities Act 2001 was an important premier step forward for government and entities. And really what we saw with both the ODA, the Ontario Disabilities Act 2001, and the AODA, its more robust successor statute, is a real commitment by government in Ontario to raising accessibility and removing barriers by January 1st, 2025. We're not there yet. We've got a long way to go.
Yes.
But my goodness, some of the standards, and particularly information and communication, the fact that obligated organizations of a certain size have to have these standards and have to make them accessible so that when you go into large, sophisticated organizations and venues, you know that as a person with disability, that you can communicate with that organization. You have the right to, in order to understand what your rights are and what the organization offers, how it's accessible, how its feedback processes work, and you can rest assured that they'll be accessible, or, if they're not. Now, unfortunately, under the AODA, you don't actually have a complaints department per se, and that's the little bit of a different thing that we recognize, that there's it takes the accessibility issues from an organizational standpoint and tries to really improve accessibility at an organizational level. But when you have individual complaints, then you've got to really go to the Human Rights Commission under the HRC, under the Human Rights Code. And that's really the way that the statutes intertwine, in my understanding. And by the way, when I speak about these issues, I'm not speaking on behalf of the Crown. I'm speaking as a private citizen who is familiar with these statutes from my own experience. But I am delighted to tell you that. Thanks, Tracy.
Well, and let's go to your private own experience.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that, I'm a four-way amputee missing my hand, so communicating and typing may be different than yourself with vision loss. And, we did a bit of a time warp on your school experience. Are you willing to kind of do a past versus current
Yeah,
communication methods of what you had as a kid in school.
absolutely, I am. And as a matter of fact, I went to what was called, after trying to enter the normal stream kindergarten school, I went to, that was local. I went downtown to what was called the Jesse Ketchum School, and it had a little program on the second floor, I think it was, and it was called the Center for Limited Vision, or Limited Vision Center. And it was really a bunch of wonderful, committed teachers that were, interested in helping children with the different disabilities. And so we had disabilities of all people, persons with disabilities of all types. We had people who had mobility challenges, as well as people with vision loss, and some people with cognitive challenges. And where we find ourselves back then is that there wasn't a lot of special equipment to bring to bear to help improve access. We had larger print on the chalkboard,
Yeah.
and we had ring binders that took forever to create large printing press-based printed material. And that meant you got your storybook 6 months after everybody else did, and they're done their reader, and you're just starting yours. You just have to work at your own pace, and we were de-streamed back then. In that program, I rejoined the normal stream school in, oh gosh, it must have been grade 5. And I didn't really have anything beyond a magnifier and my reliance on the kindness of others in terms of their notes and sharing notes and people reading things for me. So that's how it worked all the way up until university. I went to a wonderful university, Queens, and they had an accessibility, they had a wonderful accessibility office way back in 1986. Even when I was there, they were already thinking about accessibility in a forward-looking way. And they set me up with readers that were volunteers through the CNIB, as well as students. And so I did my best going through political studies and economics with readers, the dedication and help of readers. But even, it was kind of really tape recorder and listening on top of all the classwork. So it just took forever to do everything. But Queens was very supportive.
And you grew up to be a lawyer who started
Eventually.
in a segregated system that was segregated but integrated with people with intellectual impairments as well as people with vision loss.
Yeah, no, that's right.
As a lawyer, that isn't a gap where you've got a need, right?
Well,
no matter what your family tease you about.
Right, absolutely. And what I would say about that approach, while I think it's interesting that they did that probably as much because of resource issues back then in the 70s, it certainly does bring my mind to the idea that we want to be together as a community with sighted people and with people with all different types of accessibility. We don't want to have, necessarily, now sometimes it depends on the characterization of, that depends on the limitations on people's disabilities. Like certainly the Brantford School for the Blind, I'd heard a lot of wonderful things about. It certainly helped people develop skills that elevated their potential. But I didn't get to go to that school. I had kind of in between vision loss, so I had just enough to see and I wanted to at that point in time. I wanted to try my best to work as much as I could in the sighted world. So I never really learned Braille, but I did learn to use large print and navigate eventually much later in my 20s with a cane, much later than I should have. But that's a different story.
Well, and so now you're like, okay, I don't know how it's going to work, but I'm going to figure it out so that I can be as much in the able-bodied stream as possible. And now, fast forward to 2020, and you're fully immersed. You're not even working for advocacy for people with disabilities in your job, right? You're in the energy sector.
Yeah, that's right. So I am actually on SACOMA with Ministry of Environment, Climate Change, and Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. And it's a wonderful place. I'm just on SACOMA finishing off my year here. I was for 17 years or so with the Ministry of Energy, and it's now combined with Northern Development Mines. But my focus has been on the energy, the restructured electricity market, and and all of the regulated entities and the wonderful Ontario Energy Board, which is one of the most sophisticated tribunals in Canada. And so my work has really been kind of as a regulatory lawyer in this space, and now working with the amazing things they're doing at the Ministry of Environment. They really, really are forward-looking and trying to change the world for the better.
Woo!
So it's great work. It's great. Government of Ontario is, in one way, is such a fantastic employer because we really are forward-looking, trying to be inclusive, trying to improve the workplace. No organization's perfect, unstoppable, but it is
unstoppable about doing their best.
Yeah, that's right. It really is. And it's a place where if I need an accommodation, I know that the government is a receptive employer and forward-looking in terms of work. And I do need accommodation. I use very, very intensive screen reading software, including the Zoom text program myself and Kurzweil. And there are other programs people use. I think JAWS before they combined it. I think it's now called Zoom Text Fusion. It is wonderful stuff, but boy, all of this costs money. And even though it's much more accessible now in terms of the finances for these things, really the place that you get to be employed in really does matter from acquiring resources. And I'm happy to tell you that the government's wonderful from that perspective.
James, you and I are a bit of a rarity. Like statistically, most people with disabilities are not employed. And then the other rarity is that your interventions have a little bit of a price tag, but that you're the one that told me statistically, I think it was yourself or Lauren that said most adaptions for people with disabilities in the workplace, that's what stops employers from hiring people with disabilities because they think it's expensive, but most are under $500.
Oh yeah, no, that's right.
At all.
I think that's right. I think that the stigma, the social stigma is one thing, but the employer's natural and very understandable fear of the economics and how they'll impact is another obstacle that we do have to remove. And I think through awareness raising, we can see how, the work that we do with large corporations and smaller corporations that are paying attention to the accessibility issue are really going to be impressed at how, at least for some of these programs, I can't speak to all of the changes and accommodations that a person might need, but for many of them, they either are not as expensive as one might think, or there might be available to the employer funding from other sources. And it really is specific, right?
There's so many funding from other sources. I'm present to the fact that my next guest is going to photo bomb us in 8 minutes.
Okay.
I do want to talk about COVID because I would do this and you serve all of Ontario, but now your workplace. Oh, yes.
Well, no, what I was going to say is the way the Ministry of Attorney General organizes itself is that it provides legal services to all of the ministries within Ontario. Okay. And so we all work as Ontario civil servants in the public interest, doing our very best every day to serve Ontarians. And we really do. I certainly dedicate my life and my work to service for the public of Ontario. But who I serve directly are the all the way up to the deputy minister, but in a way, my legal advice stops at the level of the deputy minister in terms of direct interaction. We do participate in serving. Of course, the minister receives the benefit of all of our good legal advice, but we always serve with the deputy in the room or another civil servant so that we're not directly interacting with our minister without the deputy being present. And so that's just an old school civil service, kind of in the English tradition that the lawyers are not political. We provide unbiased, neutral advice, and we try to do the very best we can every single day, just like every other civil servant, to serve, because we know that we serve at the pleasure of all the people of Ontario when we serve at the pleasure of the Minister of the Crown, right?
Yes, yes. And, he's sounding very politically correct in some fun ways, but I must say that in my many months in preparation for last week when we trained together at the ministry,
Hmm.
that James is 24/7. So he really is.
No.
He really is doing his all. He really does care. And I know that his colleagues care. And there was an unbelievable diligence and tenacity about making this the best version of
Uh,
we could offer last week in the training and development of diversity and inclusion. And it offered some fun professional development credits as well.
oh, that's
And
right.
that's
Because as a
great.
lawyer for the Law Society demands that you, and they appropriately so, that they demand that you have a certain amount of a complement of hours, and it's a professional obligation to receive training, ongoing training every year to ensure that your skills are continually brought forward and brought up to date on some important issues. And part of that is the EDI, or the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion training that we get. And I'm glad to be part of both the Ministry of Attorney General provide training in this area, but our union, the Association of Law Officers of the Crown, provides a lot of training in the continuing legal education space. And so I'm really proud to work in that area to support awareness raising for accessibility, because if you don't come into contact with these issues, it's hard to increase your sensitivity and awareness. So
Yes.
that's why it was so great to have you there and Lauren there as well, to support the idea that and to show the success stories that you both are,
All
that
three of us.
people with disabilities can make it and do make it.
Yes, they sure do. And it's almost 2:30. We're going
Okay.
to need to wrap up very, very quickly, but I do want to share, lots of organizations have training credits. So,
Mhm.
James knows, and I know, and all of you on the Disability Channel and Roku and Your TV and on YouTube and Facebook, you all know the value of awareness. But what businesses feel is valuable sense of time doesn't always give it the credibility it needs. But one
Mhm.
way you can be a voice is that there's professional development credits in law, in nursing, in physio, in recreation leadership, in teaching as educators for additional qualifications. Almost every profession has a professional development credit builder to stay professional and current. And so you can bring us in to deliver this content. And so it is 2:27 and I need to say goodbye and wrap up this segment, but also I think it would be really great. Would you share sort of what's one COVID pain and bonus as we close out in a minute or so?
Oh, sure. For me, it's definitely the pain is the loss of the transportation network, or the incredible diminishing of the transportation network of buses in Ajax and Ontario and in Durham region. For the
And
most part,
Burlington and
yeah.
Barrie
Say again.
and Burlington and
Oh,
Barrie,
yeah. No, I'm
like
sure. All of the so we've lost a lot of our accessibility to buses, and therefore the GO train, and therefore going downtown. The wonderful thing, the opportunity, is to do this, to work at home and to be in your company through the video platform, which really had not been received widespread penetration, as far as I was aware, across the organizations until the COVID crisis hit. I'm sure some people were using it, just we weren't. We were expected to be in the room, of course. And of course, there's no substitute for being in the room. However, I don't miss the hour and a half each way commute.
right?
And I think this instantaneous opportunity wouldn't have been possible
No.
over in the pre-COVID situation, given that we wouldn't have had the setup, we wouldn't have had the video conferencing. And with that, I just want to thank you, Tracy, for having me on, and to thank you, all of the listeners out there. What a pleasure it's been to be with you.
And if people want to find you, should they search you
Um,
on LinkedIn or?
Yeah, normally, I mean, I'm happy to chat with people, but my role in the government constrains me from doing too much other than this kind of thing. Of course, I don't receive any pay or
No.
anything for these. I'm happy to receive To be honest, there's no easy way to get to me, Tracy. They'd have to contact you, and maybe you can give them a message for me or from me. But I really can't offer up my email address for that kind of thing in any easy way.
Yes.
Okay.
And so I will filter. But if there's lots of loving accolades for our show, I'll let you know.
Oh, that's so kind. And it's been a pleasure. It really has.
For me too, folks. That was James Rehob, the counsel for the Ministry Attorney General's office. Energy is his focus. You can feel his incredible, approachable energy that he brings to his business and his life, overcoming, starting in segregated schools to now being, consulting up the hierarchy in the Ontario government. And I am Unstoppable Tracy. Thank you for joining Unstoppable You and the Today Show live today on the Disability Channel and Roku. Take care, folks, and please tune in again. Bye for now, James.